Death at Rottingdean. Chapter 8. On the outrages perpetrated by smugglers was the death of a patrolling customs man at Qa'Rajh Haven. Fearing that his attentions would interfere with their landing, the gang moved the lumps of white chalk that the officer used as waymarkers for his moonlight sorties along the cliff edge. Instead of leading him safely along the coast path, the stones lured the poor man over the parapet. Hearing his cries as he tumbled over the precipice, the gang emerged from hiding, only to find the man desperately hanging by his fingertips. Deaf to pleas for mercy, one of the gang cynically trod in their adversary's fingertips, sending him tumbling to the rocks below. Richard Platt, Smugglers, Britain. At long last, Patrick was beginning to appreciate Mondays. For the 3 years he had boarded with Mrs. Higgs, he had attended the village school, handing over his obligatory 3-penny bit to Mr. Forsyth each Monday morning and suffering through endless and sleepy recitals of sums and spelling words with the other village children, some as young as 3, who shared the single classroom with him. Patrick had an innate curiosity and was quick to learn, and he soon wrote and read skillfully. Under other circumstances, he might have been an able young scholar. But Mr. Forsyth's tedious instruction was hardly inspiring, and the warmth of the classroom and the monotonous murmurs of the children set him dozing. He might prefer the freedom of the village and the downs to confinement behind the gates of learning. The confinement was at an end, at least for now. Patrick had expected that he would be sent from the village school to prep at St. Albans, which had been established 60 years before by the many-talented Dr. Thomas Redmond Hooker, master of the hunt, vicar of St. Margaret's, and reputed lookout for the Rottingdean smugglers. Now the school was taught by a less colourful team of masters, Mr. Stanford and Mr. Lang, and was made up of 7 sallow-faced boys, sons of wealthy distinguished men. But Patrick's father, neither distinguished nor wealthy, had unfortunately failed to send his son's tuition. He had, as well, failed to pay his son's boarding bill, which was now some 10 months in arrears. As a consequence, Patrick had escaped confinement at St. Albans and was more gainfully employed. "You had to fetch a basket from Miss Ridsdale at the Dean, and another at North End House," Miss Higgs said, as they sat at a small table in the kitchen over steaming bowls of breakfast porridge. "Then you had to go to the Elms where they have the new babe and fetch whatever's been got ready. But first you had to carry 6 buckets of water from the tap and fire up the copper to the washhouse." "Yes, ma'am," Patrick said, wolfing down his toast and tea and wishing fervently that Mrs. Higgs' cottage was on the mains that came in from Brighton, so that he wouldn't have to haul water all the way from the village tap. "Is that all?" "Until lunch, when I'll need 6 more buckets." Miss Higgs tore a piece of bread into a saucer of milk for the calico cat. "Off with you now. I've a big laundry to do today." Patrick didn't need any special urging. The hours since the body had been towed in had been uncomfortable ones, and he had several times wished that he had not told Mr. Kipling what he had seen. Mr. Kipling had required him to tell the man in the brown beard, Lord Charles Sheridan, and if Constable Woodhouse hadn't proved himself a pig-headed fool, he might have been required to tell him as well, and that would certainly have created difficulties, for the constable was not to be trusted. In the event, he was glad that Mr. Kipling had gotten annoyed and decided to let thundering old Woodhead discover his own clues. Having dutifully delivered 6 buckets of water and 7 baskets of dirty laundry, Patrick was free for his chief employment at the Hawkham stable behind North End House. He worked there for Harry Totwell 4 hours each morning and 5 each afternoon, and paid half his earnings to Mrs. Higgs against the delinquent board bill. What Mrs. Higgs did not know, however, was that Harry Totwell often employed Patrick on other errands in the late evenings, when the boy was supposed to be abed, and that Patrick hid those secret shillings under a stone in the abandoned windmill atop of Beacon Hill. In the event his father was never heard from again, which was quite likely in Patrick's estimation, those shillings would be the only key to his own future. Patrick's work at the Hawkham stables was far more interesting than his work in the classroom. The stables had been built in 1860 by a wealthy lord who raised the White Hawk down a little way down to the west and north. Since then, they had passed to a consortium of owners, most of them residents of Brighton, who raised the White Hawk and hunted with the Brookside Harriers under the direction of the well-known Rottingdean master, Staining Bear. This made for a continuous coming and going of gentlemen between Brighton and Walkhawk and Hawkham and the kennel, and plenty of odd jobs for eager Rottingdean boys. The stables were built around 3 sides of a gravelled yard in the lee of Beacon Hill. On one side was the coach house, which now sheltered the rickety rook coaches that plied the Rottingdean Brighton coach run. The other 2 sides were enclosed by stalls for fine horses, which each stall equipped with an iron manger for grain, a hay rack on the wall, and a door for opening into the brick-paved walkway. At one end of the walkway was the red-tiled tack room with its saddle racks and gear hanging on the wall, and next to that the chaff room with its lethal chaff-cutting machine, a vicious blade on a big wheel, which Patrick and other stable boys treated with respect. Trusses of hay were stacked nearby, and more could be pushed down through a trapdoor from the loft above, where the stable boys could be found taking their leisure on a lazy afternoon. At the other end of the walkway was the stablemaster's office, with a scarred wooden table that served as for a desk, a wooden chair, and windows from which Harry Totwell, who had been stablemaster for over a decade now, could oversee the gravel yard on the one side, the exercise paddock on the other, and the smithy beyond. The smell of Harry's room was delectably compounded of tobacco, saddle soap, and metal polish, and on its wooden walls were hung framed newspaper clippings, including one that described the remarkable Derby of 1863, run in torrential rain and preceded by 34 false starts. The favourite horse, Lord Clifton, slipped on an orange peel near the finish line, lost the race by a head, and beggared half the English peerage. Not Harry Totwell, however. Patrick had overheard him telling one of the grooms that he had been clever enough to bet on the winner, but not rich enough to bet very much. Of all the men Patrick knew, he admired Harry Totwell the most. Mr. Totwell had befriended him when he was deserted by his father, had taken him fishing and taught him to shoot. In other small ways had been as a father to him. Patrick felt a strong affection for the stablemaster, believing him to be the most astutely intelligent man in the entire village, a genius even. But Patrick's judgment was hardly objective, and perhaps it should be said merely that Harry Totwell's was an entrepreneurial genius. He was not only competent in managing the stables, which required long discussions with nervous owners on acquiring, training, breeding, and disposing of valuable horses, but in a variety of other business undertakings as well. By somewhat circuitous means, he had acquired a share in Gerald Pott's smithy, another in John Lansdowne's chemist's shop, and still another in Mrs. Howard's dress shop. Probably, if investigated more fully, one would have discovered Harry Totwell's dexterous finger in most of the pies in the village. Further, as an elected member of the parish council, he had supported Magnus Volk's ambitious schemes to build the Brighton and Rottingdean Seashore Electric Railway from the Banyo Groin to Rottingdean Gap. The railway, a quite extraordinary undertaking, was now completed. It had been Magnus Volk's idea, but it would never have succeeded if Harry Totwell hadn't talked over the parish council, and everybody in the village knew it and appreciated what Harry Totwell had done for Rottingdean. As he always did when he reached the stables, Patrick reported directly to Mr. Totwell. The stablemaster was sitting with his shiny boots propped up on a wooden table, reading yesterday's London Times, which had come down to Brighton on the train and been carried to Rottingdean in the pack of a courier who brought certain other news. "Good morning, Mr. Totwell," Patrick said, tasking off his knit cap and turning it in his hands. If he was nervous, it was with good reason. Mr. Totwell, who knew everything that went on in the village, was bound to know about the Coast Guard's death, and he might also know that Patrick had seen something he maybe shouldn't have. The Times came down, but the boots stayed up. "Morning, Paddy," Totwell said with a stern look. Somewhere in his lineage were lurked a Scot, for he was a sandy-haired, ruddy-cheeked, clean-shaven man with bright blue eyes and pale lashes. He took a gold watch out of his plate waistcoat and glanced at it. Patrick read the glance and responded with relief. "7 basket of laundry, sir." If Mr. Totwell could be angry at him about the small matter of being late, he must not have discovered the larger. "And 6 buckets of washwater," he added. "Took longer than I expected." "Ah," said Mr. Totwell and put his watch away. But surely the stablemaster was troubled about something, for his face was drawn, and there was a worried frown between his eyes. "Well, 'tis late enough, boy, and you'd best get to the stalls. A thorough cleaning, if you please. Mr. Battersby will be here to inspect the new horse this afternoon. He's a strict eye for detail, he does." At that moment, Mr. Lansdowne, the village chemist, opened the door and stepped into the office. He was a tall man, stooped and painfully thin, wearing a rusty old black coat that contrasted incongruously with the highly polished new black boots. Patrick knew that he should leave to clean the stalls, but he gave in to his curiosity and faded into the corner as if he were waiting to be dismissed. "Morning, Harry," Mr. Lansdowne said. He took off his black hat and shifted his weight nervously. "Some of the men wanted me to ask you about George Radford's killing himself, I suppose you mean, John," Mr. Tudwell said, and he leaned back in his chair. A sombre look replaced the frown. "Sad business, ain't it? Poor boy, so young and with a wife and children at home. He's to be pitied, not blamed, is what I says." Mr. Lansdowne swallowed and his Adam's apple bobbed up and down. "'Twas definitely suicide, then?" Mr. Tudwell nodded. "George was given the black mood, you know. One evening at the plough I heard him say he'd thought many times of throwing himself off the cliff. Tom Brown was there, and when he said it, he heard it too, and will testify to it." Mr. Tudwell looked up to Mr. Lansdowne. "Maybe there are some others who've heard something of the like yourself, maybe." There was a pause, and then Mr. Lansdowne replied, "Well, now that you mention it, to be sure I have. George killed himself, no doubt about it." Then he stopped to chew on a corner of his lip. "But the coroner'll come over, and from Brighton, and there'll be an inquest." "To be sure," Mr. Tudwell said in a careless tone, "but Constable Woodhouse has those matters well in hand. You can tell the others there's nothing to worry about. Just be on the safe side, though. Might be as well to postpone some of our activities." Mr. Lansdowne hunched his rusty shoulders, scowling. "Postpone? I don't like the sound of that, Harry. There's too much involved, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure others feel the same way." "We'll talk it over," Mr. Tudwell said soothingly. "Tonight at the Black Horse. But it's my judgment that we have to postpone. In fact," he glanced up and saw Patrick. "You're still here, boy. Thought you told to get those stalls." He then held up his hand. "But come back later. I'll want you to go on an errand this afternoon." "Yes, sir," Patrick said with customary alacrity, but he went to do the dirty job of mucking out the stalls, chastened and deeply perplexed. He was sure now that Mr. Tudwell knew exactly what had happened on the beach, and the thought sorely troubled him. Patrick had known the dead man scarcely at all, but it was sad to think that he had left children behind, boys perhaps, who would have to grow up without a father, and Patrick was no fool. He knew from the tone of the conversation that neither Mr. Tudwell nor Mr. Lansdowne believed that the Coast Guard had killed himself, no matter what they said. But Mr. Tudwell was his friend, and a friend of all the village, for he was the man who had brought it prosperity. Patrick owed him a loyalty, and anyway, what would be changed if he spoke about what he had seen? The Coast Guard was dead, and nothing would bring him back. With these perplexing thoughts filling his mind, Patrick worked doggedly through the morning, returned at noon to Mrs. Higgs to fill the copper, hurried through his lunch, and ran back to the stable for his commission. Mr. Tudwell was pacing up and down in front of the table in the office, hands behind his back, head down, clearly troubled. But when Patrick came in, his worried look vanished, and he put on a smile. "Ah, there you are, Paddy," he said briskly. "You're to locate a Mr. Maurice Burke at the old tobacconist in Church Road, just above Kingsway. Mr. Burke asked me to take a look at a certain grey hunter he heard was for sale, and tell him whether it'd suit him. Here's the message." "The grey hunter isn't presently available. Maybe in a few weeks," the stablemaster regarded Patrick narrowly. "Let's hear it now, Paddy." "The grey hunter is not presently available. Maybe in a few weeks," Patrick repeated. He had delivered messages concerning the availability of various horses to other merchants in Brighton and Hoe, and did not for one moment believe that a mere tobacconist was in the market for a grey hunter. But Patrick did not need to inquire into the true meaning of the message. As to that, he was already quite clear. "Very good," Mr. Tudwell said. He put his hands on Patrick's shoulders with a fatherly benevolence. "And since you're likely linger along the sea-front and lie to me and say you went lame and lost your way, you may as well take the rest of the afternoon for the job and buy yourself some sweets when you're done." He gave Patrick a pat on the shoulder and a coin in the hand. With a grin, Patrick shoved the coin in his pocket and ran out of the office. When he had gone, Harry Tudwell sank into the chair behind the table and buried his face in his hands. But even though his burning eyes were squeezed shut, he could still see the pale, drowned face of the young Coast Guard. No amount of village prosperity, no number of shiny new horses in the stable, or well-stocked dress shops on the high street could repay the wife for the loss of her husband, or the children for the loss of their father. And he, Harry Tudwell, whose intention had been of the best, who had worked hard to bring lasting prosperity to the village through its various enterprises, could hold only himself responsible for the ways the things have gotten out of hand.